The shot rang out across the canyon as Kate, Morley sank to her knees in the dusty road, watching the stagecoach disappear into the distance with everything she owned inside. The year was 1873, and the Arizona Territory had just welcomed her with a robbery, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back, a small satchel clutched to her chest, and the name of a town she wasn't even sure existed anymore. Whiskey Creek, supposedly, a half-day's walk ahead if the driver's directions before the ambush were accurate. The sun beat down mercilessly as Kate struggled to her feet. At 22, she had weathered enough storms to know that tears wouldn't bring back her trunk, or the small fortune she'd sewn into the lining of her good coat. The bandits had taken everything except the leather satchel she'd managed to hide beneath her skirts during the commotion containing her mother's tarnished locket, a few dollars, and the deed to land she'd inherited from an uncle she'd never met. "Just keep walking," she muttered to herself, adjusting her bonnet to shield her face from the relentless sun. Her once fine blue traveling dress was now coated with a layer of red dust, torn at the hem from her fall when they'd forced her from the coach. The elegant woman who had departed Chicago 3 weeks ago was gone, replaced by a desperate, parched wanderer with blistered feet and diminishing hope. By late afternoon, the distant outline of scattered buildings appeared on the horizon. Whiskey Creek wasn't much a dusty main street with a handful of weathered structures that had seen better days. No railroad. No proper hotel, just a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a blacksmith, and a cluster of modest homes, not the prosperous mining town her lawyer had described. Kate approached the general store first, where an elderly man sat on the porch, whittling a piece of wood with practiced precision. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice raspy from thirst. "I'm looking for the property that belonged to Harold Morley. I was told it was near here." The old man looked up, squinting. "Morley Place, that's been abandoned for years, about 3 miles north up by Settler's Ridge." He gestured vaguely with his knife. "Nothing there but an old shack and some scrubland. Mine played out 5 years back." Kate's heart sank. The valuable mining property her Chicago lawyer had described was worthless. Another lie in a long string of disappointments. "Is there somewhere in town I might stay? I was robbed on the road here, and I ain't no hotel," the man interrupted. "Saloons got rooms, but—" His gaze traveled over her dusty but clearly respectable attire. "Not for a lady. Widow Henshaw sometimes takes in boarders, but she's visiting her daughter in Tucson." Night was approaching, and Kate's options were dwindling by the second. "Then I'll head to my uncle's property now." "Wouldn't advise that, miss. Trail's treacherous in the dark, and there've been mountain lions spotted lately." The old man frowned, genuine concern crossing his weathered face. "There's a man up there, though. Took over the adjacent property about a year back. Keeps to himself mostly. Name's Yarrow. Yates Yarrow, a neighbor." Hope flickered briefly. "Of sorts. Bought the Winston claim after old man Winston died. Don't come to town much." He shrugged. "But he's decent enough. Helped when the Miller boy went missing last winter. Found him in half a day when the rest of us had been searching for 2. With few alternatives, Kate thanked the man and purchased meager supplies with her remaining money: a canteen of water, some jerky, and a box of matches. By the time she started up the trail to Settler's Ridge, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The path grew steeper and narrower with each step. In the fading light, Kate stumbled repeatedly, her city boots wholly unsuited for the rocky incline. A distant howl echoed through the canyon, sending a shiver down her spine. The darkness was almost complete when she spotted a faint light ahead. As she drew closer, the outline of a small cabin emerged against the backdrop of tall pines. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and a lantern glowed in a window. Beyond it, barely visible in the darkness, stood what must be her uncle's abandoned shack. Gathering her courage, Kate approached the cabin door. Before she could knock, it swung open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the firelight within. "You're lost." The voice was deep, more statement than question. "No, Kate faltered, suddenly aware of how she must appear disheveled, exhausted, and arriving unannounced at a stranger's home after dark. "I'm Katherine Morley. My uncle owned the property next to yours. I've inherited it, but I was robbed on my way here, and I have nowhere else to go tonight." The man remained silent for so long that Kate began to fear he would send her away. Finally, he stepped back, allowing the light to fall on his face. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his faded blue shirt. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling blue-gray, watchful and wary. "You're Harold Morley's niece?" he asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "Yes, from Chicago." He studied her for another moment, then nodded slightly. "Come in, then. It's not safe out there at night." The cabin's interior was simple but meticulously organized. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot suspended over glowing embers. A wooden table with 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. A narrow bed occupied one corner, covered with a faded quilt. Books more than Kate would have expected filled a rough-hewn shelf along another wall. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "You look ready to collapse." Kate sank gratefully into the chair as the man ladled something from the pot into a tin bowl. He placed it before her with a chunk of bread and a spoon. "Eat," he instructed, pouring water into a cup from a pitcher. "It's just venison stew." The simple food was the most delicious thing Kate had tasted in weeks. She ate slowly, aware of her host watching her from the other chair, his own bowl untouched. "Thank you, Mr. Yarrow," she said finally. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Town gossip travels fast. The man at the general store mentioned you." Kate set down her spoon. "I'm sorry to impose, but I was told my uncle's cabin is uninhabitable." "It is." He finally began eating. "Roof's half caved in, been empty for years." "I see." Kate fought back the despair threatening to overwhelm her. "I was misled about the condition of the property." Yarrow said nothing, but his expression suggested this didn't surprise him. "Is the mine truly worthless?" she asked. "Played out long ago." "Your uncle kept digging for years after everyone else knew it was done." He studied her. "Whoever told you differently was lying." Kate nodded, the reality of her situation sinking in. She had spent her last dollars coming west, believing she was claiming a valuable inheritance. Now she was stranded, penniless in the middle of nowhere. "You can stay here tonight," Yarrow said abruptly, rising to add wood to the fire. "Tomorrow we'll figure something out." "I couldn't possibly. The alternative is sleeping outside with the cougars and wolves." His tone brooked no argument. "I'll take the floor." Kate wanted to protest further, but exhaustion was rapidly claiming her. Yarrow wordlessly handed her a blanket and indicated the bed. Too tired to maintain propriety, she removed only her boots before lying down, pulling the blanket over her dusty clothes. "Mr. Yarrow," she murmured as sleep began to overtake her. "Why would you help a stranger this way?" He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "I never promised much," he said finally, "just peace. And I wouldn't leave anyone to the mercy of this wilderness at night." As Kate drifted into sleep, she wondered about the quiet man who had offered her sanctuary and what morning would bring to her shattered plans. Dawn arrived with the chattering of birds outside the cabin window. Kate woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, smoothing her rumpled dress and noting that Yarrow was nowhere to be seen. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a pot of coffee simmered on a hook above it. Her host had obviously been awake for some time. Kate rose, wincing at her sore muscles, and poured herself a cup of the strong black coffee. Through the window, she spotted Yarrow in the distance, chopping wood with methodical strokes. He returned shortly, arms laden with split logs. "Good, you're up," he said, placing the wood in a neat stack by the fireplace. "There's coffee." "Thank you," Kate replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Mr. Yarrow, I can't thank you enough for your hospitality, but I must impose on you one last time. Could you direct me to my uncle's property? I should assess it in daylight." Yarrow's expression remained neutral. "I'll take you after breakfast." Breakfast consisted of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses and more of the strong coffee. They ate in silence, Kate growing increasingly uncomfortable with her dependence on this taciturn stranger. When they finished, Yarrow retrieved a battered hat from a peg by the door. "It's not far," he said, leading her outside. The morning air was cool and fresh, scented with pine and sage. In daylight, Kate could see that Yarrow's cabin was nestled on a small plateau overlooking a spectacular vista of canyons and distant mountains. A corral behind the cabin housed 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding, and a dappled gray mare. They walked along a narrow path that wound through scrubby pines. After about 10 minutes, they crested a small rise and Yarrow pointed ahead. "That's the Morley place." Kate's heart sank. Place was a generous description. What remained was little more than a dilapidated shack, listing dangerously to one side. The roof had partially collapsed, and the single window was just an empty frame. Behind it gaped the dark mouth of the mine shaft, its timber supports rotting and dangerous. "It's worse than I imagined," she whispered. Yarrow said nothing, allowing her to approach the structure alone. Kate circled the shack cautiously, peering through gaps in the warped boards. Inside was nothing but debris, broken furniture, rotted blankets, rusted tools. Whatever value the property once held had long since vanished. Was there anything of worth in the mine? She asked, returning to where Yarrow waited. "Not for years. Your uncle kept digging, convinced he'd hit another vein, but—" He shrugged. "The land itself isn't bad. Good water from the spring over there." He gestured toward a grove of cottonwoods in the distance. "Could run a few head of cattle, maybe grow something in that lower section if you worked at it." Kate laughed bitterly. "With what? I have no money, no resources. The lawyer who handled my uncle's estate painted quite a different picture." "Lawyers," Yarrow muttered, as if the word itself was distasteful. "What will you do now?" It was the question Kate had been avoiding since the stagecoach robbery. "I don't know," she admitted. "Return to Whiskey Creek and seek employment, I suppose. Perhaps someone needs a teacher or a shopkeeper's assistant." Yarrow's expression suggested what he thought of that plan. "Town's dying. Mine's been closed 5 years. Half the buildings are empty. Stage only comes through twice a month now." "Then I'll go to Tucson," Kate said with more confidence than she felt. "Or Phoenix." With what money? His bluntness stung, but Kate lifted her chin. "I'll find a way, Mr. Yarrow. I've faced difficulties before." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Yarrow is fine. Or Yates, if you prefer." "Yates," Kate repeated, testing the name. "And I'm Kate." He nodded, then turned back toward his cabin. "Come on. No point standing here." Back at the cabin, Kate washed her face in a basin of cool water while Yarrow disappeared outside again. When he returned, he carried a bundle of clothing. "These belong to Jenny Winston," he explained, placing the items on the table. "She was about your size. Her husband owned this place before me, died 2 years back. Kate examined the offerings: 2 simple calico dresses, a woolen shawl, undergarments, and a pair of sturdy boots. I couldn't possibly. They're no use to anyone else, Yarrow interrupted. And your city clothes won't last a week out here. His practicality was difficult to argue with. Thank you, Kate said. I'll repay you somehow. Yarrow shook his head. No need. I'm riding to check my traps. You can change while I'm gone. After he left, Kate gratefully exchanged her filthy traveling dress for one of the calico ones. It was plain but clean and fit reasonably well with a few adjustments. The boots were slightly large but infinitely more practical than her ruined city footwear. She was combing her long auburn hair with her fingers when Yarrow returned. He paused in the doorway, regarding her changed appearance with an unreadable expression. Better, he said finally. Yes, much, Kate agreed. Mr. Yarrow Yates, I need to ask something of you. He waited, expectant. Would you consider buying my uncle's land? I know it's not worth much, but it would give me enough to start somewhere else. Yarrow considered this. I don't need more land, please, Kate persisted. Even a small amount would help me tremendously. He studied her for a long moment. I won't buy it, he said finally, but I have another proposal. Kate tensed, immediately wary. She had encountered enough proposals from men to know when to be cautious. Seeming to sense her concern, Yarrow clarified quickly. The cabin needs work. It's barely weatherproof. The garden's overrun because I'm gone hunting too often. I need help, and you need somewhere to stay. You're offering me employment? Kate asked, surprised. Room, board, and a small wage, he confirmed. Until you decide what you want to do, or until winter at least. Traveling gets difficult after the first snow. It wasn't what Kate had planned, but it was a lifeline when she desperately needed one. What would my duties include? Cooking, cleaning, tending the garden. I'm gone trapping 3 days a week usually. The rest of the time I hunt or work the small claim I've got up the ridge. You're still mining, small scale. Enough to trade for supplies in town. It supplements the trapping. He paused. The arrangement would be strictly professional. Kate felt her cheeks warm at the implication. Of course, I never thought otherwise. People will talk, he warned. Town's small. Gossip's the main entertainment. I'm not concerned with gossip, Kate replied, though in truth, the thought of her reputation did trouble her. But her options were few, and survival took precedence over propriety. I accept your offer, Mr. Yarrow. Thank you. He nodded once, the matter settled. I'll clear the storage shed for your use, more private than sharing the cabin. Kate hadn't considered that aspect and was grateful for his forethought. When would you like me to begin? No time like the present, he said, gesturing to the garden visible through the window. Those beans won't pick themselves. Life with Yates, Yarrow quickly settled into a rhythm that was both demanding and strangely satisfying. Kate rose before dawn each day, stoked the fire, and prepared a simple breakfast. Yarrow was always awake before her, having already tended to the horses or checked his nearby traps. They worked separately most mornings, Kate in the garden or the cabin, Yarrow hunting or working on improvements to the property. He had transformed the small storage shed into a snug sleeping quarter for her, adding a proper window, a narrow bed, and shelves for her few possessions. It was spare but private, and Kate came to appreciate its simplicity. Afternoons often found them working together on larger projects. Yarrow was rebuilding part of the corral, and Kate assisted by handing him tools or holding boards in place. He spoke little, but was patient in showing her how to perform unfamiliar tasks, from splitting kindling correctly to preserving the garden's bounty for the coming winter. You've never put up preserves before? He asked one afternoon as they worked side by side, Kate slicing apples while Yarrow stirred a pot of simmering fruit. "No," Kate admitted. "In Chicago, we bought such things from shops." He made a non-committal sound. "City life." "It was different," Kate agreed. "But not as comfortable as one might imagine. After my parents died, I lived with my aunt. She was not kind." Yarrow glanced at her. "That why you came west?" "Partly," Kate said, surprised by his interest. Yarrow rarely asked personal questions. The inheritance seemed like a chance to start fresh. "My aunt had arranged a marriage for me to a man 3 times my age, a business associate of hers." "You ran." "I did," Kate confirmed. "Though I thought I was running towards something, not just away." Yarrow nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Most of us out here are running from something." "And what were you running from, Mr. Yarrow?" Kate asked boldly. His expression closed immediately. "That's a story for another time." Kate had learned not to press when he withdrew this way. Yarrow kept his past closely guarded, and she respected his privacy even as her curiosity grew. As September gave way to October, a routine developed on the days Yarrow left to check his distant trap lines. He would depart before dawn, leading the pack horse loaded with supplies, leaving Kate alone for 2 or 3 days at a time. Initially, she found the solitude unnerving after the constant bustle of Chicago, but gradually came to treasure the peaceful hours. On these days, Kate ventured farther from the cabin, exploring the surrounding wilderness. She discovered hidden meadows carpeted with wildflowers, crystal-clear streams teeming with fish, and ancient pictographs etched into sheltered rock faces. The land her uncle had dismissed as worthless revealed its treasures to her patient observation. Kate also used these solitary days to examine her uncle's property more thoroughly. Despite its dilapidated appearance, the shack contained fascinating remnants of Harold Morley's life, geological journals, hand-drawn maps, and letters that painted a picture of a man obsessed with striking it rich, yet knowledgeable about the land he worked. One afternoon, while Yarrow was away, Kate was sorting through these papers when a thunderstorm swept suddenly over the ridge. Racing back to Yarrow's cabin with her arms full of salvaged documents, she arrived soaking wet but triumphant, only to find the roof leaking in 3 places. Remembering what Yarrow had shown her, Kate quickly positioned buckets under the worst leaks, then climbed into the cabin's small loft with patches of canvas and nails. The repair was awkward and temporary, but it held against the downpour. When the storm passed, she surveyed her work with pride, then set about mopping up the water that had entered before her intervention. She was hanging wet cloths by the fire to dry when Yarrow returned a day earlier than expected. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene: Kate with her hair falling loose from its pins, the buckets on the floor, the patched ceiling. "Roof leaked," she explained unnecessarily. Yarrow crossed to examine her handiwork, climbing partway up the ladder to the loft. "Not bad," he said finally, which from him constituted high praise. "Storm drove me back early. Creek was rising too fast to cross safely." "I'm glad you're back safely," Kate said, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "There's stew keeping warm." They ate in companionable silence, the rain returning to drum against the roof. Kate watched surreptitiously as Yarrow ate, noting the strong lines of his profile in the firelight. In the weeks she'd been there, his taciturn nature had gradually softened, though he remained a man of few words. She had learned to read his expressions, to understand what went unsaid. "I found something interesting in my uncle's papers," she said as they finished eating. "Maps of the area, detailed ones, and journals about the geological formations." Yarrow looked up with interest. "May I see them?" Kate retrieved the documents from where she'd stashed them safely away from the leaks. Yarrow examined them with surprising knowledge, his finger tracing the notations on the maps. "Your uncle knew what he was doing," he commented. "These are good surveys. You understand all this?" Kate asked, surprised. Yarrow nodded. "Studied geology for a time before." He trailed off, that familiar reticence returning. "Before you came west," Kate prompted gently. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, unexpectedly, he continued. "Before the war. I was at university in Pennsylvania." It was the first concrete detail he'd shared about his past. Kate wanted to ask more but sensed his boundaries. "The Civil War." "Yes." His tone discouraged further questions, but after a moment he added, "I was with the 148th Pennsylvania. Gettysburg, Cold Harbor, Petersburg." The names hung heavy in the air between them. Kate had heard of these terrible battles, of course, but had been sheltered from their reality in her Chicago home. "You don't have to speak of it," she said softly. "Best not to," he agreed, turning his attention back to the maps. "These might be useful, though. Your uncle marked potential new veins that he never had the chance to explore." "Do you think there might still be gold in the mine?" Kate asked, hope flickering briefly. Yarrow shook his head. "Not in his old workings, but these other areas he marked." He traced a line on the map. "Might be worth investigating when I have time." That night, as Kate retired to her small shed, she found herself thinking about Yarrow's revelation. The war had ended 8 years ago, yet he still carried its weight visibly. It explained something of his solitary nature, his need for the peace he'd mentioned that first night. Over the following weeks, as autumn's chill deepened into winter's first bite, Kate noticed subtle changes in their interaction. Yarrow began to linger at the table after meals, sometimes reading while she mended clothing by the fire. Occasionally, he would share stories of his travels, descriptions of the Painted Desert, tales of encounters with Navajo traders, observations of wildlife behavior. Never personal history, but glimpses into his experiences that Kate treasured. For her part, Kate found herself looking forward to his returns from trapping expeditions with an eagerness that surprised her. The cabin felt emptier without his quiet presence, the evenings longer without their simple companionship. One evening in early November, as the first serious snow threatened, Kate was reading aloud from one of Yarrow's books, a volume of Emerson's essays, when he interrupted with an unexpected question. "Why didn't you go through with the marriage your aunt arranged?" Kate looked up, startled. "Besides his age," Yarrow nodded, waiting. "He was." Kate searched for the right words. "Controlling, cold. He viewed me as an acquisition, not a person. My aunt saw only his wealth and position." "You wanted more," Yarrow observed. "I wanted a choice," Kate corrected. "And yes, perhaps I wanted what my parents had. They married for love, against both their families' wishes. My father was a professor with radical ideas, my mother from a conservative banking family. They were devoted to each other until influenza took them both in '67. Yarrow studied her. "And now?" "What do you want now?" The question caught Kate off guard. What did she want? When she'd fled Chicago, she'd been focused solely on escape, then on survival. But now, "I want to build something that's mine," she said slowly, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. "Not dependent on anyone else's charity or control. I want." She gestured toward the window where the vast wilderness stretched beyond. "Freedom, purpose." "Not an easy thing for a woman alone," Yarrow commented. "No," Kate agreed. "But neither is surviving a war, I imagine, yet here you are." His eyes met hers, something like respect kindling in their depths. "Here we both are." The snow began that night, fat flakes swirling down to blanket the ridge in pristine white. By morning, drifts reached the windowsills, and Yarrow pronounced it unsafe for Kate to return to her shed. "You'll take the bed," he insisted. I'll use my bedroll by the fire." Kate wanted to protest, but knew he was right. The small shed would be bitterly cold despite the improvements he'd made. They arranged a screen of blankets for privacy, creating separate spaces within the cabin's single room. The snow continued for 3 days, confining them to the cabin together. Kate expected the forced proximity to be awkward, but instead found a comfortable rhythm developing. Yarrow revealed unexpected talents. He played a passable harmonica in the evenings and taught Kate how to carve simple figures from pine wood. She, in turn, shared stories from her teaching days in Chicago and improvised new recipes from their limited winter stores. On the 3rd evening, as they sat before the fire sharing the last of a bottle of whiskey Yarrow had produced from some hidden cache, Kate found the courage to ask the question that had lingered since her arrival. "Why did you really let me stay that first night? The truth." Yarrow contemplated his tin cup, turning it slowly in his hands. "I told you I wouldn't leave anyone to the wilderness at night. But to offer me employment afterward, to help me as you have," Kate persisted. "There must have been more to it." He was silent so long that Kate thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "You reminded me of someone. My sister, Clara." He set his cup down carefully. She had the same determination in her eyes even when everything was falling apart around her. "Where is she now?" Kate asked gently. "Dead. Richmond, 64. She was working as a nurse in a field hospital when it was shelled." His jaw tightened. "I was 20 miles away with my regiment, couldn't get to her." "I'm so sorry," Kate murmured, understanding now some of the shadows that haunted him. "After the war, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." He stared into the fire. "Drifted west, tried mining in Colorado, ranching in Texas. Nothing felt right until I found this place." "Because of the peace," Kate said, remembering his words from that first night. "Yes." His eyes met hers. "Until you arrived on my doorstep, looking half dead but still standing tall." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Kate found herself moving closer to him, drawn by something she couldn't name. "And now," she asked, "do you regret taking me in?" Yarrow shook his head slowly. "No," he said simply. "I don't." The tension between them shifted, transformed into something new and fragile. Kate was acutely aware of his proximity, of the firelight playing across his features, softening the hard lines of his face. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her, and she wasn't sure what her response would be. Instead, he stood abruptly. "It's late. We should rest." The spell broken. Kate nodded and retreated behind the blanket screen to the bed, her mind tumbling with confused emotions. She had come to respect Yarrow deeply, to value his quiet strength and unfailing fairness. But the warmth she felt in his presence had grown into something more complex, something that both frightened and exhilarated her. Sleep came slowly that night, and when it did, Kate dreamed of open skies and a freedom she had never known. The snow finally stopped the next day, though drifts remained piled high around the cabin. Yarrow spent the morning clearing paths to the outbuildings and checking on the horses. Kate watched from the window as he worked, powerful shoulders moving rhythmically as he shoveled through the deep snow. Their conversation from the previous night hung in her thoughts, coloring her perception of him. When he returned, stomping snow from his boots, Kate had hot coffee waiting. They fell back into their routine, but something had shifted between them, a new awareness, an unspoken acknowledgement of deepening connection. As November yielded to December, the weather alternated between clear, bitter cold days and fierce snowstorms that confined them to the cabin. On clear days, they worked together cutting and storing firewood, checking Yarrow's nearest trap lines and preserving the last of their fall harvest. One crisp morning, Yarrow announced he needed to make a trip to Whiskey Creek for supplies before the next storm. "I'll come with you," Kate said, eager for a change of scenery after weeks on the ridge. Yarrow hesitated. "It's a hard ride in this weather." "I can manage," Kate insisted. "Besides, I need a few things myself." Reluctantly, Yarrow agreed. They set out at dawn, Kate riding the gray mare while Yarrow led the way on his bay gelding. The journey that had taken Kate half a day on foot months earlier passed quickly on horseback. Despite the snow-covered trail, Whiskey Creek appeared even smaller and more dilapidated than Kate remembered. Several buildings stood empty, windows boarded over. The saloon remained open, as did the general store, but there was little sign of activity on the main street. Their arrival drew immediate attention. Faces appeared in windows, and the few people on the street stopped to stare as Yarrow helped Kate dismount outside the general store. "Told you there'd be talk," he murmured as they entered the shop. The elderly proprietor Kate had met on her first day greeted them with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Morley, hardly recognized you. Heard you'd taken up with," he caught himself, glancing at Yarrow's impassive face. Heard you were staying up at Settler's Ridge." "Mr. Yarrow has kindly employed me to help with his household," Kate replied evenly, aware of the assumptions being made. "I'm quite well, thank you." They purchased their supplies efficiently: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition, lamp oil, and a few small luxuries like peppermint sticks and a newspaper from Tucson. Kate selected thread and needles, and Yarrow unexpectedly added a small package of tea and a book of poetry to their purchases. As they were concluding their business, the door opened, admitting a well-dressed man Kate didn't recognize. The stranger's eyes widened at the sight of her. "Well now, a new face in our little community," he exclaimed, removing his hat to reveal slicked-back hair. "Theodore Blackwood, at your service, madam. I represent the Arizona Mining and Development Company." "Katherine Morley," Kate replied cautiously, noting how Yarrow had stiffened beside her. "Morley," Blackwood's interest visibly sharpened. "Any relation to Harold Morley, my uncle," Kate confirmed. "I've inherited his property on Settler's Ridge." Blackwood's smile widened. "Indeed. What a fortunate coincidence. I've been trying to locate the owner of that parcel for some time. My company has a very generous offer for mining rights to that land." Kate exchanged a glance with Yarrow, whose expression had darkened. "The mine is played out," she said. "It has been for years." "Ah, but new techniques make previously unprofitable claims quite valuable," Blackwood countered smoothly. "We're consolidating holdings throughout the territory. I'd be delighted to discuss terms with you, perhaps over dinner." Before Kate could respond, Yarrow stepped forward slightly. "Miss Morley isn't interested in selling." Blackwood's gaze flickered between them, his smile cooling. "I believe the lady can speak for herself, Mr. Yarrow, and we're leaving now." His tone left no room for argument. Outside, as they loaded their supplies onto the packhorse, Kate confronted him. "You had no right to answer for me like that." Yarrow secured a bundle with more force than necessary. "That man's company has been buying up land all over the territory, forcing out small operators. They use underhanded tactics, threatening, sabotaging equipment, damming up water sources." "Even so, shouldn't I at least hear what he has to offer?" Kate argued. "The property is worthless to me as it stands." "Is it?" Yarrow challenged. "Have you considered what you might do with it?" "Your uncle's maps show promising areas that haven't been explored. The water rights alone are valuable." Kate was taken aback by his vehemence. "Why do you care what I do with the property?" Yarrow's jaw tightened. "Because I've seen what happens when companies like Blackwood's move in. They strip the land, pollute the streams, then abandon it when they've taken everything of value." His eyes met hers. Is that what you want for your inheritance? The passion in his voice gave Kate pause. She had never seen Yarrow so animated, so invested in anything beyond his daily existence. No, she admitted finally. No, it isn't. They completed their preparations in tense silence and began the journey back to Settler's Ridge. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, and Kate found herself reflecting on Yarrow's words. She had come west seeing the land only as a means to an end, a stepping stone to financial independence. But during her months on the ridge, something had changed. She had come to value the wild beauty of this place, its harsh challenges and unexpected rewards. They were halfway home when Yarrow suddenly reined in his horse, holding up a hand for Kate to stop. His body was tense, alert. "What is it?" Kate whispered, scanning the terrain. "Smoke," Yarrow said grimly, pointing toward the ridge, coming from the direction of the cabin. They urged their horses forward, anxiety mounting as they approached. Cresting the final rise, Kate gasped at the sight before them. Smoke rose not from the cabin, which stood intact, but from the direction of her uncle's property. As they drew closer, the source became clear. The old shack was engulfed in flames, the fire having already consumed most of the structure. Yarrow dismounted swiftly, approaching as close as the heat would allow. Kate followed, watching in horror as the last physical remnant of her inheritance collapsed in a shower of sparks. "This was deliberate," Yarrow said, examining the ground around the burning structure. "Look here, multiple points of origin. Someone doused it with coal oil. Blackwood." Kate asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Or someone working for him," Yarrow confirmed, "letting you know how serious he is about acquiring your property." Kate felt cold rage building within her, displacing the shock. He had no right. "Men like him believe they have every right," Yarrow replied bitterly. They returned to the cabin, checking carefully to ensure no one lurked nearby. Inside, Kate paced the small room, anger and indignation warring with fear. "What do we do now?" Yarrow stoked the fire, his movements precise and controlled. "We be careful. Blackwood wants your land, and he's demonstrated he'll use any means to get it." "But why? If the mine is truly played out, your uncle's maps," Yarrow interrupted. "The areas he marked but never explored. Blackwood's company has new equipment, new methods. They must believe there's something valuable there." Kate considered this. "So my worthless inheritance might not be so worthless after all." "Possibly," Yarrow acknowledged, "but proving it would take resources we don't have." "We." Kate caught the pronoun immediately. Yarrow met her gaze steadily. "I won't let you face this alone, Kate." The simple declaration, and his use of her first name, sent warmth spreading through her despite the circumstances. "Thank you," she said softly. That night, after a subdued meal, they sat before the fire discussing options. Yarrow suggested filing a complaint with the territorial marshal, though he admitted it might accomplish little given the remoteness of their location and the influence of mining companies in the territory. "I could sell and be done with it," Kate mused, "but the idea of rewarding Blackwood's tactics is galling." "There's another possibility," Yarrow said slowly. "We could form a partnership, pool our resources to explore the areas your uncle mapped. If there is something valuable there, we'd share the profits." The proposal surprised Kate. "You do that? Risk your savings on what might be a fool's errand?" "I've been working a small claim of my own," Yarrow reminded her. "Haven't found much, but enough to know the ridge has potential. With your uncle's maps and my equipment, we might succeed where he failed." Kate studied him, wondering at the transformation in the solitary man who had grudgingly offered her shelter months ago. "Why would you take such a risk for me?" Yarrow looked away, uncomfortable with the direct question. "It's not just for you. Blackwood's company has been eyeing my land too. If they gain a foothold with your property, mine will be next." He paused. "And I've grown accustomed to having you here." It was as close to a personal declaration as Yarrow had come, and Kate felt her cheeks warm. "A partnership, then," she agreed. "Equal shares in whatever we find." They sealed the agreement with a handshake, Yarrow's calloused palm warm against hers. As their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary, Kate felt a current of something deeper than business interest pass between them. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation and planning. Using Harold Morley's maps as guides, Yarrow and Kate surveyed the surrounding terrain, identifying the most promising locations for exploration. With the remains of the shack reduced to ashes, they focused their attention on a different section of the property, where a narrow ravine cut through the ridge. December turned to January, bringing harsh weather that frequently interrupted their work. On stormy days, they remained in the cabin, Kate copying and organizing her uncle's notes while Yarrow repaired equipment and planned their next moves. Their isolation and shared purpose fostered a growing intimacy. Conversation flowed more easily. Silence became comfortable rather than strained, and Kate found herself increasingly aware of Yarrow as more than her employer or business partner. One evening, as they sat reviewing their progress, Kate noticed Yarrow watching her with an intensity that sent a flutter through her chest. "What is it?" she asked, self-conscious under his gaze. "You've changed," he observed. "Since you arrived." Kate smiled slightly. "I should hope so. I was half-starved and desperate then. It's more than that." Yarrow leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You found your strength out here." The simple assessment touched Kate deeply. "I suppose I have," she acknowledged, "though I never would have survived without your help." "You underestimate yourself," Yarrow countered. "You're resourceful, determined. You would have found a way." His confidence in her was both surprising and gratifying. "Perhaps," Kate conceded, "but I'm glad I didn't have to." Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. Yarrow broke the connection first, rising to add wood to the fire, but something had shifted again, moving them incrementally closer. January gave way to February, bringing brief respites of milder weather that allowed them to intensify their exploration efforts. Using primitive equipment and following the cryptic notations in Harold Morley's journals, they focused on a section of the ravine where quartz outcroppings suggested potential gold deposits. Their first significant discovery came on a cold but clear morning. Yarrow had been working a narrow seam in the ravine wall while Kate documented their findings. His triumphant shout brought her running to find him holding a rock threaded with gleaming yellow veins. "Gold," he confirmed, examining it closely. "High-grade ore, not just traces." Kate stared at the specimen, scarcely believing their luck. "Is there more?" "The vein continues into the rock face," Yarrow nodded. "Your uncle was right, there is gold here, just not where he was looking." They worked until dusk, extracting samples and tracing the extent of the discovery. By the time they returned to the cabin, exhausted but elated, they had confirmed that the vein was substantial, potentially valuable enough to justify full-scale mining operations. That night, they celebrated with a special dinner and the last of Yarrow's whiskey. The atmosphere was jubilant, their usual reserve giving way to laughter and shared excitement about the future. "We'll need to file a proper claim," Yarrow explained as they sat before the fire, "and find capital for equipment if we want to develop it ourselves." "Or we could sell to someone other than Blackwood," Kate suggested. "There must be legitimate mining operators in Tucson or Phoenix." Yarrow nodded thoughtfully. "There are, but first, we need to keep this discovery quiet until we're ready." Blackwood has eyes everywhere. The reminder of their adversary sobered them both. Since the burning of the shack, there had been no further incidents, but Blackwood's interest in the property had not waned. The shopkeeper in Whiskey Creek had reported that the mining agent had been asking questions about Kate and her relationship with Yarrow. "You think he suspects what we've found?" Kate asked. "He knows we're looking," Yarrow replied. "That's enough to make him dangerous." Kate shivered, suddenly aware of their vulnerability. The cabin was isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor, and they had valuable information that others would kill to obtain. Sensing her unease, Yarrow moved closer, his hand covering hers where it rested on the rough wooden table. "I won't let anything happen to you," he promised, his voice low and intense. The simple touch and the conviction in his words sent warmth coursing through Kate. She turned her hand to clasp his, drawing strength from his steadiness. "Nor I to you," she replied, surprised by the fierceness of her own sentiment. Yarrow's eyes darkened, and for a breathless moment, Kate thought he might kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently before releasing it, the moment passing like a shadow across the sun. But something had been acknowledged between them, something neither could pretend didn't exist. The following days were consumed with work as they carefully documented their find and prepared to file official claims. They needed to journey to Tucson, the territorial capital, to register their discovery properly, a trip that would take several days and leave the property unguarded. "We both need to go," Kate insisted when Yarrow suggested she remain behind. "My name is on the deed, and we're partners. I should be present for the filing." Yarrow reluctantly agreed, recognizing the logic of her argument. They prepared carefully, concealing evidence of their discovery and securing the cabin as best they could. The most valuable samples and maps were packed to travel with them, leaving nothing of significance for potential trespassers to find. As February waned, they set out for Tucson, traveling south through increasingly populated territory. The journey took 4 days, during which they camped under the stars, sharing the trail with occasional freight wagons and other travelers. Kate found herself enjoying the adventure despite its purpose. She had grown comfortable with the routines of wilderness living, confident in her ability to ride all day and make camp at night. Yarrow, observing her competence, treated her as a true partner rather than someone to be protected, a shift that deepened her feelings for him. Tucson proved to be larger and more developed than Kate had imagined, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and the bustle of commerce. After months in the isolation of Settlers Ridge, the activity was both exciting and overwhelming. They took rooms at a modest hotel, separate accommodations that nonetheless raised eyebrows given their arrival together. Kate found herself caring less about such judgments than she once would have. The woman who had fled Chicago obsessed with propriety had been transformed by her experiences in the Arizona Territory. At the Territorial Land Office, they filed their claim without incident, paying the necessary fees and recording the boundaries of their property. The clerk, a bored young man, showed little interest in their business beyond ensuring the paperwork was complete. "That seemed too easy," Kate commented as they left the office. "Filing is the simple part," Yarrow replied. "Protecting what's ours will be harder." They spent 2 additional days in Tucson, acquiring supplies unavailable in Whiskey Creek and consulting with a mining engineer recommended by the land office. The expert confirmed their assessment of the ore samples and provided valuable advice about development options. On their final evening in the city, Yarrow surprised Kate by suggesting they dine at the hotel's restaurant rather than the simpler establishment they had patronized previously. "A celebration," he explained, "of our partnership's first success." Kate agreed eagerly, taking extra care with her appearance. The green calico dress she wore was still simple compared to her former Chicago wardrobe, but she had embellished it with careful stitching and added a ribbon from the Tucson Mercantile to her hair. Yarrow, too, had made an effort, wearing a clean shirt and newly purchased vest. His dark hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed closer than usual. The transformation emphasized his strong features, reminding Kate that beneath the frontier trapper was a man who had once moved in educated circles. The hotel dining room was modest by Chicago standards, but represented luxury after months of cabin living. White tablecloths, polished silverware, and actual glass goblets adorned the tables. A small ensemble played quiet music in one corner, and the aroma of roasted meat and baked goods filled the air. They were seated at a small table near a window overlooking the main street. Yarrow ordered wine, a rare indulgence, and they toasted their success. "To the Morley Yarrow mine," Kate proposed, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," Yarrow countered, his eyes never leaving hers as they drank. The meal that followed was the finest Kate had eaten since leaving Chicago: tender beef, fresh vegetables, and apple pie with actual cream. Throughout the evening, their conversation flowed easily, touching on subjects beyond their immediate concerns for the first time in months. Yarrow spoke of his university days, of his passion for geology and natural history before the war interrupted his studies. Kate shared stories of her brief teaching career and her dreams of opening a school of her own someday. "You could still do that," Yarrow suggested. "If our venture succeeds, you'll have the means." "Perhaps," Kate acknowledged, "but I've found I enjoy our work. There's satisfaction in building something tangible, in seeing immediate results from one's efforts." "You've taken to frontier life remarkably well," Yarrow observed, a note of admiration in his voice. Kate smiled. "I had a good teacher." As the evening progressed, Kate became increasingly aware of a tension between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with possibility. Yarrow's gaze lingered on her face, his hand occasionally brushing hers as they reached for the wine or bread. When they finally rose to retire to their separate rooms, Yarrow escorted Kate to her door. They paused in the dim hallway, the sounds of the hotel fading around them. "Thank you for tonight," Kate said softly. "It was lovely." Yarrow nodded, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "Kate," he began, then stopped, struggling for words. "Yes," she prompted gently. Instead of speaking, he reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and slightly rough. Kate's breath caught at the tenderness of the gesture. Without conscious thought, she leaned slightly into his touch, her eyes meeting his. The invitation in her response was unmistakable. Yarrow stepped closer, his hand sliding to cup her face. For a heartbeat, they remained suspended in anticipation. Then he lowered his head and kissed her. The contact was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but deepened as Kate responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, the warmth of him seeping through the fabric of his shirt. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Yarrow rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, his voice low. "Why didn't you?" Kate asked, equally quiet. "You deserve better than a scarred ex-soldier with nothing to offer but a cabin in the wilderness." Kate drew back slightly to meet his gaze. "You offered me peace," she reminded him, "and respect, and partnership. That's more than any man has ever given me." Yarrow's expression softened, vulnerability showing through his usual reserve. "I can't promise an easy life." "I don't want easy," Kate replied with conviction. "I want real." He kissed her again then, more confidently, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. Kate returned his embrace without reservation, acknowledging to herself what she had known for some time. She had fallen in love with this quiet, honorable man. When they finally separated, reluctance evident in both their faces, Yarrow stepped back. "We should rest," he said. "Long journey home tomorrow." Home. The word resonated within Kate, carrying new meaning. The cabin on Settler's Ridge had indeed become home to her, not just a temporary shelter. "Good night, Yates," she said, using his first name deliberately. His smile was worth the boldness. "Good night, Kate." The journey back to Settler's Ridge seemed shorter somehow, filled with new awareness and shared glances that spoke volumes. They traveled steadily, camping along the trail as before, but with a new intimacy that transformed the routine. In the evenings, as they sat before the campfire, Yarrow's arm would find its way around Kate's shoulders, drawing her against his side. They spoke of the future practical plans for developing their claim, but also tentative hopes for what might grow between them. "We should consider building a proper house," Yarrow suggested one night as they discussed improvements to the property. "The cabin was fine for a trapper living alone, but if we're to develop the mine—" He didn't complete the thought, but Kate understood the implication. "Where would you build it?" "There's a good site near the spring, sheltered from the north wind but with a view of the valley." His fingers traced patterns on her shoulder as he spoke. 2 stories, perhaps, proper glass windows, a kitchen large enough for a real stove. Kate smiled at the detail in his description. "You've given this some thought." "More than some," he admitted. "Since about a week after you arrived." The confession warmed her. "I'd like that," she said simply. "A home we build together." They were a day's ride from Settler's Ridge when they encountered the first sign of trouble. Smoke was visible in the distance, rising from the direction of their property. "Campfire, maybe," Kate suggested hopefully, but Yarrow's grim expression told her he suspected worse. They approached cautiously, leaving the trail to circle through the trees. As they crested the final ridge, their fears were confirmed. The cabin was intact, but activity swarmed around it. Several men worked at the entrance to the ravine where they had made their discovery, and tents had been erected nearby. "Blackwood," Yarrow growled, recognizing the well-dressed figure directing operations. "He's jumped our claim." They retreated to a safe distance to assess the situation. At least 6 men were visible, all armed, and equipment had been brought in, suggesting they had been there for days and intended to stay. "They can't do this," Kate whispered fiercely. "We filed our claim legally." "Law doesn't mean much out here unless you can enforce it," Yarrow replied, his expression hardening. "Blackwood's counting on that we won't have the resources to challenge him." "What do we do?" Yarrow considered their options. "We need help. The territorial marshal has an office in Prescott, but that's days away. Closer would be the army post at Fort Whipple." "Will they intervene in a civil matter?" Kate asked doubtfully. "Depends on how we present it," Yarrow said. "Blackwood's men are armed and occupying private property." "That's enough to get attention, at least." They circled wider, avoiding detection, and made camp several miles south of the ridge. The next morning, they divided their resources. Yarrow would ride to Fort Whipple to seek assistance, while Kate would travel to the nearest town with a telegraph office to send messages to the land office in Tucson, and an attorney they had consulted there. "I don't like separating," Yarrow admitted as they prepared to part ways. "If Blackwood's men find you, I'll be careful," Kate assured him. "And I can handle myself better than when I first arrived." She patted the small revolver Yarrow had taught her to use during their months together. He nodded, acknowledging her competence but still concerned. 3 days, he said. Meet back here in 3 days, no matter what. If I'm not here, continue to Fort Whipple and ask for Captain Hayes. He knows me." Kate agreed to the plan, though the prospect of separation filled her with anxiety. Before they parted, Yarrow pulled her into a fierce embrace, his kiss carrying the weight of words unsaid. "Be safe," he murmured against her hair. "And you," she replied, memorizing the feel of him, the scent of pine and leather that clung to his clothes. They rode off in different directions, each carrying part of their documentation to ensure that if one was intercepted, the other could still prove their claim. Kate reached the telegraph office in a small settlement called Cedar Springs by nightfall. The operator, a young man with spectacles, raised his eyebrows at a woman traveling alone but accepted her messages and payment without comment. With her task completed sooner than expected, Kate debated returning immediately to the rendezvous point, but decided to follow their original plan. Yarrow would not return for days, and waiting alone would accomplish nothing. Instead, she secured a room at the town's small boarding house and purchased additional supplies for their confrontation with Blackwood. The second night of her stay, Kate was awakened by urgent knocking at her door. Alarmed, she grabbed her revolver before approaching cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Message for you, madam," came a young voice. "From Mr. Yarrow." Kate opened the door slightly to find a boy of perhaps 12 standing in the hallway, hat in hand. "How did you find me, Mr.?" "Yarrow described you and said you might be here," the boy explained. "He said to tell you plans have changed and you should meet him at Willow Creek tomorrow at noon. Something felt wrong. Did Mr. Yarrow give you a token to prove he sent you?" Kate asked, remembering their agreed-upon precaution. The boy looked confused. "No, madam, just the message." "Who gave you this message? Was it Mr. Yarrow himself?" The boy shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no. It was a man in a fancy coat who said he was Mr. Yarrow's partner. Gave me 2 bits to deliver it. Blackwood. It had to be." "Thank you for your honesty," Kate said, pressing a coin into the boy's hand. "If anyone asks, you delivered the message and I thanked you." After the boy left, Kate considered her options. The message was clearly a trap, meant to lure her to an isolated location. But it also meant Blackwood knew they had returned and were taking action against his claim jumping. Worse, he might have intercepted Yarrow on his way to Fort Whipple. Kate packed her belongings quickly and slipped out of the boarding house before dawn. Instead of heading to Willow Creek or the rendezvous point, she rode directly toward Fort Whipple, pushing her mare as fast as the animal could safely travel. The journey took a full day and part of the night, Kate stopping only when necessary to rest her horse. As sunrise painted the eastern sky, she approached the military post, a collection of adobe and wooden buildings surrounded by a low wall. At the gate, a young soldier stopped her. "State your business, madam." "I need to see Captain Hayes immediately," Kate replied. "It's regarding Yates Yarrow." The name produced an immediate reaction. The soldier called for his superior, and within minutes, Kate was escorted to an office where a tall man with a graying mustache sat behind a desk. "I'm Captain Hayes," he said, rising as she entered. "You mentioned Yarrow?" "Yes, sir. I'm Katherine Morley, his partner." Kate quickly explained their situation, the claim, Blackwood's occupation of their property, and Yarrow's plan to seek the captain's assistance. "He should have arrived here 2 days ago." Hayes frowned. "No one by that name has reported to the fort. You believe he may have been intercepted?" "I fear so," Kate confirmed. "And now Blackwood is trying to lure me into a trap as well." The captain studied her thoughtfully. "Yarrow and I served together briefly during the war. If he's in trouble, I'll help." He turned to the orderly. "Assemble a patrol, 10 men ready to ride in an hour." Kate sagged with relief. "Thank you, Captain." "Don't thank me yet, Miss Morley. We need to find Yarrow first." His expression softened slightly. "You care for him." It wasn't a question, but Kate answered anyway. "Yes, very much." Hayes nodded as if confirming something to himself. "He's a good man. One of the best I served with, despite everything he endured." He picked up his hat. "We'll bring him home." The patrol departed promptly, Kate riding with them despite Hayes's initial objections. Her knowledge of the terrain and the location of their claim proved valuable as they approached Settlers Ridge from an unexpected direction. They established a position overlooking the property late that afternoon. Blackwood's operation had expanded, more tents had been erected, and activity around the mine entrance had intensified. Of Yarrow, there was no sign. "They're extracting ore already," Hayes observed through his field glasses, "moving quickly." "They know their claim is illegal," Kate replied. "They're trying to remove as much value as possible before they're stopped." Hayes formulated a plan for the morning they would approach openly, using military authority to demand Blackwood's withdrawal. If Yarrow was being held, they would find him. As darkness fell, Kate found it impossible to sleep, her mind filled with worst-case scenarios. She was standing watch when a shadow detached itself from the trees nearby. She raised her revolver instantly. "Kate," came a familiar voice, barely above a whisper. "Yates." She gasped, lowering the weapon as Yarrow emerged from the darkness, his face bruised but very much alive. She flew to him, embracing him fiercely before examining his injuries. A cut above his eye had crusted with dried blood, and he moved stiffly, favoring his left side. "How did you escape?" she asked as he greeted Hayes with a firm handshake. "They weren't expecting me to have friends nearby," Yarrow explained. "I convinced one of the guards I was dying from their beating, got him to lower his guard." Hayes grinned. "Same trick you used at Cold Harbor." "Works more often than it should," Yarrow agreed, settling beside Kate with obvious relief. "Blackwood has men watching the trails. I've been circling for 2 days trying to reach the fort." Kate recounted her own experiences while Hayes outlined their plan for the morning. Yarrow listened intently, adding details about the layout of Blackwood's camp and the number of armed men he had observed. "We move at dawn," Hayes decided. "Yarrow, you should rest. You look like you've been through hell." "I've seen worse," Yarrow replied, but accepted Kate's insistence that she tend his wounds, away from the others. As she cleaned the cut on his forehead, Yarrow caught her hand. "I was afraid they'd found you too," he admitted, his voice low. "When I realized they were setting a trap." "I'm smarter than they gave me credit for," Kate said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Besides, I had an excellent teacher in suspicion." His smile was weary but genuine. "That you did." He touched her face gently. "Kate, if this goes badly tomorrow—" "It won't," she interrupted firmly. "Captain Hayes has authority on his side, and we have legal claim to the property." "If it does," Yarrow persisted, "I need you to know something." He took a deep breath. "I love you, have for months now, should have said it sooner." The simple declaration, delivered without flourish but with absolute sincerity, filled Kate with warmth that banished the night's chill. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "And we're going to take back what's ours. Together." Yarrow's kiss was tender despite his split lip, a promise rather than a farewell. They kept watch together through the remaining hours of darkness, drawing strength from each other's presence. Dawn brought clarity to the landscape and resolution to their purpose. Hayes deployed his men strategically, surrounding Blackwood's camp, before announcing their presence with a bugle call that shattered the morning stillness. The response was immediate. Men emerged from tents, weapons in hand, confusion evident on their faces. Blackwood himself appeared last, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. Hayes rode forward, his uniform and bearing projecting authority. Theodore Blackwood, by order of the United States Army, you are directed to vacate this property immediately. You are trespassing on a legally registered mining claim. Blackwood recovered quickly from his surprise. This is a misunderstanding, Captain. I have legitimate business interests here. Your business interests included beating and holding a man against his will, Hayes countered, gesturing to Yarrow, who had stepped forward with Kate, and attempting to lure his partner into a similar trap. Blackwood's expression hardened as he recognized Yarrow. You've been misinformed, Captain. This man attacked my workers. We detained him for our safety. That's a lie, Kate interjected, producing the documentation from her saddlebag. We have the registered claim to this property, filed in Tucson 2 weeks ago. You are the trespassers here. A tense standoff ensued as Hayes examined the papers. The soldiers remained positioned around the camp, rifles ready but not yet aimed directly at Blackwood's men. The documentation appears in order, Hayes announced finally. Mr. Blackwood, you and your men will gather your personal belongings only and depart. Any ore already extracted remains the property of the rightful claim holders. Blackwood's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. I'll have your commission for this interference in civilian affairs. You're welcome to file a complaint, Hayes replied evenly. After you've vacated the property, you have 1 hour. For a moment it seemed Blackwood might resist. His eyes darted to his armed men, calculating odds. But facing trained soldiers, he ultimately chose prudence over confrontation. This isn't over, he warned, glaring at Yarrow and Kate. There are other ways to settle such disputes. Through the courts, perhaps, Kate suggested sweetly, where we can discuss your attempted kidnapping and assault charges as well. The implied threat struck home. Blackwood's confidence visibly faltered as he realized the legal jeopardy his actions had created. Without further argument, he began directing his men to pack up. Under the watchful eyes of Hayes's patrol, Blackwood's operation dismantled its camp. They were permitted to take only personal items and equipment not directly related to mining activities. The ore they had extracted, several sacks of promising quality, remained behind, along with tools and structural improvements to the mine entrance. By mid-afternoon, the last of Blackwood's men had departed, escorted by half of Hayes's patrol to ensure they left the territory entirely. The captain himself remained with the rest of his men to help secure the property. He'll be back one way or another, Hayes warned as they surveyed the abandoned camp. Men like Blackwood don't give up easily when there's profit involved. We'll be ready, Yarrow replied, his arm around Kate's waist. And legal this time. No opportunity for him to exploit. Hayes nodded approvingly. You've got a defensible position here, good water, and now military awareness of your situation. That should help. He glanced between them with a knowing smile. And you've got each other, which counts for more than most realize. That evening, after Hayes and his remaining men departed with promises to check on them regularly, Kate and Yarrow stood before their cabin, battered but unburned, the interior ransacked but reparable. It will take work to set things right, Yarrow observed, surveying the damage. Everything worthwhile does, Kate replied, leaning against his side. But we've proven we can do it together. They worked until sunset, restoring order to the cabin, salvaging what could be saved and making lists of what needed replacement. Despite the destruction, there was something satisfying about reclaiming their space, about asserting their rightful place on the land they had fought for. As darkness fell, they sat before a freshly built fire, sharing a simple meal from the supplies Kate had purchased in Cedar Springs. The familiar routine felt precious after the dangers they had faced. I meant what I said last night, Yarrow said quietly as they finished eating. About loving you. Kate smiled, reaching for his hand. I know, and I meant my response. This life won't be easy, he warned, echoing his words from Tucson. Even with the mine producing, it's a hard country. I've never wanted easy, Kate reminded him. Just meaningful, real. She looked around the simple cabin that had become her home. This is real, Yates. What we're building here, it matters. Yarrow's expression softened as he drew her closer. When I told you that first night that I never promised much, just peace, I meant it. It was all I thought I had to offer. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. But you've brought so much more to this place, to me. As have you to me, Kate replied. You offered shelter when I had none, respect when I'd known only control, partnership when I'd been treated as property. She smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. Peace was just the beginning. Their kiss was a promise, a commitment to the future they would build together, not just the mine or the house by the spring, but the life they would share in this wild, beautiful land they both had come to love. Epilogue. 2 years later, the house stood completed against the backdrop of pines, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. 2 stories of locally quarried stone and carefully milled timber. It represented not just prosperity but permanence, a declaration that Settlers Ridge was no longer a temporary shelter, but a true home. Kate stood on the wide front porch, watching as riders approached along the improved road that now connected their property to Whiskey Creek. The town itself had experienced a revival of sorts following the success of the Morley Yarrow mine, with new businesses opening and abandoned buildings finding new purpose. Among the riders, Kate easily recognized her husband's tall figure. Yates had ridden to meet the supply wagon, accompanying it back with his usual caution, old habits from difficult times not entirely forgotten despite their current security. As they drew closer, Kate descended the steps to greet them, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. At 7 months along, she moved more carefully these days, but insisted on maintaining her involvement in all aspects of their operation. Everything goes smoothly, she called as Yates dismounted. Without a hitch, he confirmed, crossing to kiss her in greeting. His hand joined hers on her abdomen just as their child delivered a forceful kick. Active today, constantly, Kate laughed. Your son or daughter seems determined to be a miner, judging by the excavation work being done on my ribs. Yates smiled, the expression coming more naturally to him now than when they had first met. Marriage and impending fatherhood had softened the harder edges of his nature, though he remained vigilant about protecting what they had built together. The mine had proven even more productive than they had initially hoped. The vein Harold Morley had theorized extending deep into the ridge. They had hired workers from Whiskey Creek and neighboring settlements, implemented modern equipment, and established a reputation for fair business practices that stood in stark contrast to operations like Blackwood's. The man himself had made one last attempt to undermine them through legal channels, filing spurious claims in Tucson that had ultimately been dismissed. The humiliation and legal costs had driven him from the territory, his company selling its holdings to more reputable operators. As the wagon was unloaded supplies for the mine, furnishings for the house, and books for the small school Kate had established for workers, children, Yates led his wife back to the porch where they could oversee the activity in comfort. Letter came from Hayes, he mentioned, producing an envelope from his pocket. He's been promoted to major, stationed at Fort Apache now. We should invite him to visit, Kate suggested. He can be the baby's godfather. Yates nodded agreement, his arms settling around her shoulders. They had built a community around them over the past 2 years, friends, employees, allies, people Kate had come to consider family in the absence of her own. Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed, she mused, watching the activity in what had once been wilderness. If that stagecoach hadn't been robbed, you'd have found your way here regardless, Yates asserted. You're too stubborn to have given up, Kate laughed. Perhaps, but would you have taken in a disheveled stranger if I'd arrived with my trunk and proper attire? Eventually, he conceded with a smile. Might have taken longer to see past the city manners to the woman beneath. The woman beneath had surprised even Kate herself, stronger, more resilient, and more fulfilled by this life than she could have imagined when she fled Chicago. The pampered existence she had once known seemed like another lifetime, another person entirely. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridges, casting long shadows across their property, Kate leaned against her husband's solid presence. "Are you happy, Yates?" she asked softly. He considered the question with characteristic thoroughness before answering. "More than I believed possible," he said finally. "After the war, I didn't expect to find peace, let alone." He gestured toward their home, the thriving operation beyond, and finally to Kate herself and the child they had created. All of this, Kate understood. They had both come to Settlers Ridge seeking escape, she from a controlled future, he from a haunted past. What they had found instead was a beginning, a chance to build something meaningful together. "I never promised much," Yates murmured, echoing his words from that first night as he drew her closer. "Just peace." Kate smiled, turning in his embrace to face him. "And you've given me that and so much more." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, this quiet man who had become the center of her world. Peace was just the foundation. We built the rest together. As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch of the home they had created, watching the stars emerge above the ridge that had brought them together, two lost souls who had found in each other not just peace, but purpose, partnership, and a love neither had dared to imagine before that fateful night when she arrived at his shack and changed both their lives forever.